You've worked here for a very long time. I understand. It was an honor working with you. In front of the entire company, the new manager decided to show everyone who was in charge. Without raising his voice or arguing, he picked up an envelope, looked at an employee with nearly 30 years of service, and fired him in front of everyone. At that moment, some co-workers lowered their heads while others remained silent. The manager smiled, believing he had earned the team's respect. However, over the next few days, clients began calling. Problems that had never existed started appearing, and the company discovered a truth no one had dared to say. The man who had been fired was not just another employee. He was the person who kept everything running without anyone even noticing. Stay until the end. Because this story shows how a decision made to demonstrate authority became the greatest leadership lesson that company had ever faced. Monday morning was busy at North Valley Components, one of the region's largest manufacturers of industrial equipment. The parking lot was already nearly full when the first employees walked through the gates carrying backpacks, helmets, and cups of coffee. Inside, the pace was the same as always. Machines running, computers starting up, forklifts moving through the aisles, and orders arriving non-stop. To an outside observer, it looked like an ordinary week. But there was one important change. That day, a new manager would take control of operations. His name was Victor. He was 40 years old, had studied at some of the best business schools, had an impeccable resume, and possessed above-average confidence. He believed that every company needed strong leadership. In his view, respect was earned by demonstrating authority from the very first days. Before 8 o'clock, he gathered the supervisors and coordinators. He displayed charts and spoke about productivity, cost reduction, and efficiency. During the presentation, he repeated the same statement several times. From now on, things will be done my way. Some silently agreed. Others simply watched. Among them was Miguel, a 58-year-old employee who had worked at the company for more than 29 years. He was a specialist in process integration, but he had never held a management position and did not enjoy being in the spotlight. He was known for something else. Whenever a difficult problem arose, someone would say, "Call Miguel." He knew every department, every machine, and every procedure. He knew exactly who to contact whenever something went wrong, not because he had memorized the manuals, but because he had built that knowledge over decades. Miguel was respected by operators, technicians, supervisors, and even former executives. Victor, however, did not know his story. All he knew was what appeared on a spreadsheet. On that spreadsheet, Miguel was listed as one of the company's oldest employees and one of the highest-paid workers in the operations department. Victor looked at the figure and asked the supervisor, "What exactly does this employee do?" "He prevents many problems from happening," the supervisor replied without hesitation. Victor smiled discreetly. "Preventing problems doesn't show up in performance metrics. That is precisely why the metrics are good," the supervisor tried to explain. Victor closed the folder. "If no one can measure the results, perhaps this position is larger than it needs to be." The conversation ended there. Throughout the week, Victor watched Miguel closely. He saw him walking between departments, speaking with operators, examining equipment, answering calls, and writing information in a small notebook. To Victor, it looked like a lack of focus. On Friday morning, he called a general meeting. More than 50 employees entered the conference room, assuming it would simply be a presentation about the company's new goals. Victor began by speaking about change. Then he slowly walked through the room, stopped directly in front of Miguel, looked at everyone and declared, "Every company needs to understand that no one is indispensable." Silence filled the room. Miguel remained calm. "Some positions exist simply because they have always existed," Victor continued. He then picked up a white envelope, placed it on the table, and slowly pushed it toward Miguel. "Today, we are bringing this chapter to an end." Several employees widened their eyes. No one had expected it, especially not in that manner. Miguel opened the envelope and quickly read it. It was his termination letter. He did not argue, raise his voice, or attempt to convince anyone. He picked up a pen, signed the document, and carefully put it away. Then he stood and shook hands with his closest co-workers, one by one. Some were emotional. Others could not hide their outrage. When Miguel reached the door, Victor decided to make one final statement. He wanted to make it clear who was in charge. I hope everyone understands that. From now on, I am the one who decides the future of this company. Miguel stopped, slowly turned around, and looked directly at Victor. His expression remained calm, without any sign of anger. Then he replied, "Leadership is not proven on the day someone leaves." He paused briefly and added, "It reveals itself in the days that follow." The room remained silent. Victor simply smiled, convinced that he had demonstrated his authority in front of the entire team. Miguel left carrying a small box containing his belongings. The door closed, and the employees slowly returned to their departments, but no one could forget the scene they had just witnessed. What Victor did not know was that the public firing would not simply mark the end of Miguel's career at the company. It would be remembered as the first chapter of the greatest operational crisis North Valley Components had faced in years. The following Monday at 6 in the morning, the company gates opened. Trucks began entering, the first machines were turned on, and the operators took their positions. From his office, Victor watched everything through the glass wall. He was satisfied. On Friday, he had demonstrated his authority. Now everyone knew who was in charge. At 7:15, he gathered the supervisors again. "How are operations going?" "Everything is proceeding as expected," one of them replied. Victor smiled. "Excellent. I hope everyone has realized that no one is truly missed." Some nodded. Others avoided making any comments, not because they agreed, but because they were still trying to understand how the company would operate without Miguel. For nearly 30 years, an invisible routine had existed. Before production even began, Miguel walked through the departments, briefly spoke with the operators, checked small adjustments, reviewed schedules, analyzed special orders, and corrected information before it entered the system. It was quiet work, almost impossible to measure, but it made all the difference. That Monday, no one completed that routine. At 8:05, the first warning sign appeared. A team was waiting for approval to begin producing a batch, but the documents were incomplete. The supervisor tried to locate the person who normally performed that check and then realized it was Miguel. They decided to proceed anyway. After all, it seemed like a minor detail. A few minutes later, the logistics department called. There was a discrepancy between the client's order and the internal production schedule. Normally, Miguel identified that kind of difference before the truck even left. This time, no one noticed. "Fix it," Victor ordered. That was always his response. However, the problems began appearing more frequently. At 9:20, an operator was desperately searching for authorization to replace a production tool. No one knew where to find it. Miguel knew the exact procedure and could resolve the issue in less than 5 minutes. Without him, it took 40 minutes. The production line came to a stop. How much time did we lose? Victor asked. 40 minutes. Make it up during the rest of the shift. It sounded simple, but industrial production did not work that way. One delay caused another. Meanwhile, in the customer service department, the phones began ringing. First one call, then another, followed by 3 more. Clients wanted to confirm deadlines, changes, and technical information. The customer service representative opened the system and discovered that some records were incomplete. Miguel used to update all of this before. 8, she told a co-worker. Now we need to figure out how he did it, the other woman replied. At the end of the morning, Victor called a brief meeting. He wanted to understand why minor delays were appearing in several departments. Each supervisor described a different problem. One spoke about documents, another about scheduling, and another about suppliers. Individually, none of the issues seemed serious. Together, however, they were beginning to form an enormous puzzle. "We are only talking about organization," Victor said irritably. The most senior supervisor took a deep breath. "It is not only about organization." Victor crossed his arms. "Then explain it." Miguel made connections. Connections. He knew the people and the processes. He knew who needed to speak with whom before problems appeared. "That can be learned," Victor replied. "It can," the supervisor agreed. But not over a single weekend. The meeting ended. Victor left convinced that the situation was merely resistance to change. That same afternoon, he received an email from the sales department. An important client wanted an urgent meeting. It was not yet a complaint, but the client wanted clarification regarding the company's recent changes. At the end of the day, Victor decided to walk through the factory. He wanted to prove to himself that everything remained under control. As he walked through the corridors, he noticed something unusual. People were speaking less, the supervisors appeared tense, and the operators were consulting documents much more frequently. Everything took a little longer. There was no chaos, but the smoothness that had once existed was gone. When he returned to his office, he found Miguel's small notebook on his desk. Someone had discovered it in a drawer while reorganizing the department. Victor opened it out of curiosity. He expected to find simple reminders, but the pages were filled with detailed notes, clients' names, suppliers' contact information, important dates, equipment requiring follow-up, and risks that needed to be monitored over the coming weeks. Every page revealed something different. It was not merely a notebook. It was practically a map of the entire operation. Victor slowly closed it. For the first time since the dismissal, doubt entered his mind. Perhaps Miguel had actually done much more than he had imagined. Even so, he still believed he could reorganize everything. What Victor did not know was that the true consequences of his decision had not even begun. The following morning, the phone in the president's office rang. The secretary answered and listened carefully. Her expression immediately changed. She stood and hurried to the president's office. "Mr. Roberts, it's the director of operations at Hamilton Industries." The president looked up. Hamilton was the company's largest client and represented almost a quarter of its annual revenue. He picked up the phone. "Good morning, Richard. How can I help you?" On the other end of the line, the voice was polite, but something sounded different. "Before we discuss anything else, I need to ask you a question." "Of course. Is it true that Miguel no longer works for you?" The president looked at Victor, who was sitting across from him, and replied, "Yes, there has been an internal restructuring." Several long seconds of silence followed. "Then we need to reconsider our partnership," Richard said. Everyone in the room froze. "Has there been a problem with our products?" The president asked. "No." "With our delivery times?" "No." "Then why?" Richard took a slow breath, because Miguel understood our operation better than any other supplier. For years, he called us before we even knew there was a problem. He warned us when he noticed risks, suggested improvements that saved us time, and helped our team whenever necessary. He never looked for recognition. He simply solved problems. After another brief silence, Richard declared, "We trusted the company because we knew Miguel was part of it." The president had no response. "We will continue receiving the orders already in progress, but any new contracts will be suspended until we understand how this change will affect your operation," Richard concluded. The call ended. The president slowly placed the phone on the desk and looked directly at Victor. "Did you know he had this kind of relationship with our clients?" "No, I never saw any of this in the reports," Victor replied, almost whispering. "That is because trust does not appear on spreadsheets. It appears when someone decides to continue doing business with you." At that moment, Victor began to understand the magnitude of his mistake. He asked the sales department to prepare a complete report showing how many clients had been in direct contact with Miguel. The results arrived less than an hour later. It was not only Hamilton. There were dozens of companies, large, medium-sized, and small, with records of frequent conversations with him. What was even more impressive was that nearly all those conversations had happened before any complaint arose. Miguel did not wait for problems to happen. He prevented them. Victor spent the rest of the morning examining documents. He found old emails, messages of gratitude, and letters from clients praising Miguel's dedication. One of them read, "Whenever Miguel participates in a project, we feel confident moving forward." Victor closed his eyes. Now he understood why so many employees had remained silent on Friday. They had not merely lost a co-worker. They had lost someone who supported part of the trust the company had built over decades. That afternoon, more problems appeared. A supplier delivered components with specifications different from those requested. Normally, Miguel inspected the material before it entered inventory. This time, no one noticed the error. Hours later, an entire team had to stop working to correct the problem. Lost time continued to accumulate. Deliveries began falling behind, and supervisors worked past their regular hours. Operators worked overtime in an attempt to recover production. At the end of the day, the president called Victor into his office again. Leadership does not mean proving who is in charge, he said calmly. Victor remained silent. It means understanding who keeps the company running. For the first time since taking the position, Victor admitted to himself that he had made a mistake. However, he still believed there was a solution. He picked up the phone, found Miguel's number, and pressed the call button. The phone rang 3 times. On the 4th ring, Miguel answered. "Hello?" Victor took several seconds to respond. It was the first time in his many years as a manager that he had needed to call someone he had fired. "Miguel, this is Victor." There was only silence on the other end, not the silence of anger, but the silence of someone waiting to hear the real reason for the call. "We need to talk," Victor said. "I'm listening." Victor looked through the window. The machines were still running, but now he saw something he had previously ignored. The entire operation seemed slower, heavier, and more difficult. Then he decided to tell the truth. "I made a mistake. I believed your role could be replaced quickly. I thought experience was nothing more than years of service, and I believed leadership meant demonstrating authority. I was wrong." "We all make mistakes at some point," Miguel replied calmly. Victor breathed a sigh of relief and asked the question he truly wanted to ask. "Would you be willing to come back?" After several seconds of silence, Miguel replied, "I can't." Victor felt a chill in his stomach. "Why?" "Because I started working for another company yesterday. It was too late. They did not ask how old I was or how much I cost," Miguel continued. "They asked me only one question. What was it? How do you manage to prevent so many problems before they happen?" Victor could not answer. It was the first time in a long while that someone wanted to understand my work before judging me, Miguel concluded. The call ended a few minutes later. Victor remained motionless, feeling that he had lost far more than an employee. That afternoon, the president called an emergency meeting. All managers and supervisors were present. He displayed a chart showing only 4 days: Friday, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. During that short period, the number of delays had increased. Client inquiries had risen, operational costs had grown, and several hours of overtime had been authorized. There had not been one major disaster. There had been hundreds of small problems that simply had not occurred before. The president turned off the projector and asked, "Does anyone know why?" No one answered, because we spent years seeing only what could be measured and forgot to value what kept everything running. Some professionals appear when a crisis happens, while others prevent it from happening. Miguel belonged to the second group. The meeting ended in complete silence. By Thursday, the company no longer felt the same. The machines continued running, trucks kept arriving, and orders were still being produced, but the sense of calm had disappeared. Every minor problem resulted in a meeting. Every decision had to be checked twice. Every question moved through several departments before it was resolved. At 8 in the morning, the president gathered the managers and the most senior supervisors. He wanted an answer to the question that would not leave his mind. What exactly did Miguel do? For several seconds, no one answered. Then Anthony, a maintenance supervisor who had been with the company for 25 years, raised his hand. "May I explain?" The president nodded. Anthony walked to the whiteboard and drew several circles. Each one represented a department: production, purchasing, logistics, quality control, maintenance, and customer service. Then he drew lines connecting all of them. In the center, he wrote only one name: Miguel. "Everyone thinks Miguel solved problems," Anthony began. "But that was not exactly what he did. He made people communicate before the problems existed. When production changed a schedule, Miguel informed logistics. When a supplier was late, he informed purchasing. When a client changed a specification, he spoke with engineering. But that is part of several people's jobs." Victor interrupted. Anthony smiled. "Exactly. But no one else made all those connections at the same time." Another supervisor decided to speak. "Most of the time, we did not even notice. We thought everything simply happened on its own, because he never announced that he had solved something," a coordinator added. "He simply solved it." Victor began remembering the scenes he had ignored. Miguel walking between departments, speaking briefly with employees, writing down small details, and calling suppliers. Everything that had once looked like a waste of time had actually kept the entire company synchronized. "Is anyone prepared to take over that role?" the president asked. No one answered. It was not because there were no competent professionals, but because everyone knew the truth. Technical knowledge could be taught. But building the trust Miguel had developed over nearly 3 decades would take a very long time. That afternoon, the sales department sent another report. 3 more clients had requested in-person meetings. None of them wanted to cancel their contracts, but they were all asking similar questions. Who will be our contact now? Who will oversee our projects? Who knows our history? Victor realized that the clients rarely asked about prices or discounts. They asked about people. He opened Miguel's notebook again and read it page by page. There were notes about clients' birthdays, important dates, the preferences of different companies, upcoming projects, and handwritten observations. Call before the preventive maintenance. Confirm the requested change. Check inventory before the order. These were not ordinary reminders. They were demonstrations of care. For the first time, when Victor looked through the factory window, he did not see only machines. He saw people who depended on one another to keep everything working. At that moment, he understood a truth he had never learned at business school. The best professionals are rarely noticed when everything is going well, because their real job is to prevent problems from happening. As they left the company that evening, the president walked beside him and said, "Authority makes people obey. Respect makes people stay." Victor did not respond. He finally understood that he had confused the two, and that confusion was beginning to cost far more than he had imagined. On Friday morning, Clara, the sales director, entered Victor's office carrying a folder. "We need to talk." Inside the folder were several reports. None of them were about production. They were all about clients. "Since Monday, I have received more calls than I did during the previous 3 months, Clara explained. "Complaints? No, questions. Everyone wants to know who will oversee their projects now that Miguel is gone, who knows their history, and who will warn them about potential risks." They were not complaints. They were expressions of concern. "Do you know why our largest clients remained with us for so many years?" Clara asked. "Because of our quality." "That too. But mainly because they trusted the people." Clara showed him several emails that clients had sent over the years. In every one of them, Miguel was praised for identifying inconsistencies in advance, preventing delays, and contacting clients before they even realized there was a problem. There were dozens, perhaps hundreds, of messages. None had ever been presented during meetings because they never seemed urgent. Praise usually arrives quietly. Problems make noise. A short while later, the president entered the room. He read some of the documents and spent several seconds looking through the window. "Do you know what our greatest mistake was?" he asked. "Firing Miguel," Victor replied. "That was only the result. The real mistake was believing that experience could be measured only through numbers." That day, Victor also realized that he had not merely lost Miguel's trust. He had damaged the trust of his own employees. When a respected professional is treated that way, everyone begins wondering who will be next. That night, Victor could barely sleep. He repeatedly thought about the last words Miguel had spoken before leaving. Leadership is not proven on the day someone leaves. It reveals itself in the days that follow. Now he fully understood what those words meant. The following Monday, the company received an invitation to attend an international industrial trade show. All the major clients would be there, including the company's competitors. The president decided they would attend. Perhaps it would be an opportunity to restore the market's confidence. 2 days later, the team arrived at the convention center. There were hundreds of companies, large exhibition stands, machines, robots, and clients moving from one side of the building to the other. Victor thought it would be just another event until he heard a familiar voice. On the other side of the corridor stood Miguel, wearing the badge of another company. Several executives surrounded him, waiting to greet him. Directors, engineers, and former clients smiled when they saw him. Miguel was not there as a visitor. He was one of the event's invited speakers. A few minutes later, his name appeared on the main screen. Miguel Alves, specialist in operational reliability and preventive management. The auditorium was completely full. Victor entered discreetly and sat in one of the back rows. Miguel stepped onto the stage. He was still the same calm and humble man without the slightest sign of arrogance. He began his presentation by displaying the image of a gear and asking, "What keeps a company running?" The answers came quickly: technology, machines, investment, automation. Miguel smiled. All those things help, but no company can grow without people who care about the details almost no one notices. The greatest losses rarely begin with major problems. They begin with small warning signs that were ignored. Victor felt a tightness in his chest. That was exactly what had happened. Miguel told a story without mentioning any names or companies. He explained how experienced professionals worked to prevent crises that would never appear in reports. At the end of his presentation, the audience gave him a standing ovation. Clients formed a line to speak with him, while several companies competed for a few minutes of his attention. Victor watched from a distance. At that moment, he understood something he would never forget. Miguel had never needed to say that he was important. The people said it for him. On the way back to the hotel, the president remained silent. It was only when they entered the elevator that he finally spoke. "Now, do you understand why so many clients were asking about him?" "Yes," Victor replied, sincerely. "The difference between an ordinary employee and an extraordinary professional is that the extraordinary professional continues to be remembered even after leaving." The following morning, they received more news. The company where Miguel now worked had secured one of the largest contracts in the industry. The new client was Hamilton Industries. At that moment, Victor realized that his greatest challenge would not be simply recovering clients. It would be rebuilding the trust of his own employees. A company can survive a mistake, but it can hardly grow when people stop believing in those who lead it. 3 months passed. North Valley Components remained a respected company. Production had returned to its normal pace. New procedures had been implemented and new professionals had been hired. The company managed to move forward, but the environment was never the same. Employees began documenting everything more carefully. Meetings became longer and decisions took more time. It was not because they lacked competence, but because everyone had learned that some kinds of knowledge could not be found in any manual. One Monday morning, the president called all the company's leaders to a special meeting. This time, there were no financial charts, targets, or presentations. There was only an empty chair in the center of the room. Everyone looked at it curiously. A few months ago, we made one of the greatest mistakes in this company's history, the president began. We lost a professional who understood our operation better than anyone else. But the worst thing was not losing an employee. The worst thing was discovering his value too late. He then pointed toward the empty chair. This chair will remain here during every leadership meeting. It does not represent a person. It represents a question. Before making any important decision, ask yourselves, are we evaluating only the numbers, or are we also seeing the people? Victor slowly lowered his head. He knew that question existed because of the decision he had made. A few days later, the company launched a new internal program. Its purpose was to document the knowledge acquired by its most experienced professionals, create mentoring programs, encourage the exchange of experience between generations, and value people before it was too late. The program was given a name, chosen by the employees themselves, Project Legacy. Meanwhile, at his new company, Miguel began another major project. He coordinated young teams, visited clients, and trained new engineers. His experience was now being used to strengthen the entire organization. During a technical visit, a newly hired engineer asked, "Mr. Miguel, what is the greatest lesson you have learned after so many years?" Miguel smiled discreetly, looked at the factory in operation, and replied, "People usually believe that experience means knowing how to solve problems. But true experience is being able to prevent them from happening." The young man wrote down those words, never imagining that he would carry that lesson with him for the rest of his career. That same week, Victor received a letter. There was no familiar sender's name. Inside the envelope was only a small, unsigned card containing one sentence: "Respect is the investment that produces the greatest returns." Victor read those words several times and placed the card inside his desk drawer. He never discovered who had sent it, but he never forgot the message. Years passed. New managers and executives arrived, new technologies were introduced. Machines changed, systems evolved, and processes became more modern. However, there was one story every new leader heard during training. The story of a manager who wanted to prove that he was in charge and decided to fire an employee in front of the entire team. At the time, the decision appeared to be nothing more than a demonstration of authority. As the days passed, everyone realized that it had cost far more than they had imagined. It was not simply because of one professional, but because the decision revealed a truth that many companies learn too late. The true wealth of an organization is not found only in its machines, buildings, or contracts. It is found in the people who earn the trust of others every day, even when no one is watching. Leadership is not about showing that you have the power to fire someone. Leadership is recognizing the people who help a company grow before their absence reveals the value they always had. That was how Victor learned, in the most difficult way possible, that respect cannot be imposed through authority. It is earned through the decisions we make when dealing with people.